Hey, thanks for tuning in to Garden Hands. You can see my dad is out on the tractor here, and in this video we're going to walk through how we set up a cut flower garden back in the spring of 2022. We purchased this tractor along with a mower and a tiller, and right away we started putting it to use. One of the first projects that got underway was this cut flower garden. We talked about the cut flower garden and why it was established in a previous video, but it was basically set up so that I could have a space where I was going to grow flowers just for cutting to make bouquets to give out to people in the community, friends, family, neighbors, that sort of thing. And I did have a few plants around the yard that needed a home as well. When we got started on building this cut flower garden, I believe it was in late May, maybe early June. It was later in the planting season than one would normally go out and get flowers in the ground. I remember that. I don't remember the exact timing. But if I were to start a cut flower garden again, I probably would just put the landscape fabric or cardboard or black plastic down to kill off whatever was growing in its spot. But because we wanted to get going right away and this tractor came with a tiller, we went with tilling up a strip of land that was about 105-ish feet long and about 23 or 24 feet wide. It's right along a pasture out in our front yard. It's in full sun all day. There's no shade anywhere around it. At the time, there's no water that runs to it. And really, these flowers are just going to have to survive on their own unless I'm going to carry buckets of water out to them, which I did not do. I can't give you a whole lot of specifications about what settings he might have used with the tractor or tiller. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the comments and he can answer them. But I think his plan was to kind of rough up the ground, go back over it, dig a little bit deeper, and then he let it sit for a couple days to dry out. And he came back a few days later and went over everything one more time. We had to pick out a few big rocks. It actually wasn't too bad, but kind of smoothed it out a little bit. I did end up bringing in a few loads of compost that I had going. And to be honest, I probably should have brought in more compost, but I was so excited to get the landscape fabric on that driving back and forth actually took more time than I had patience for. So this landscape fabric, I believe it's 6 feet wide. There's yellow lines on it that show the 12-inch markers, which was actually really helpful later on when we were burning holes into the fabric. I believe most of the landscape fabric that I bought was DeWitt brand. It was pretty heavy duty. And then I just secured it in the ground with landscape staples. I did get the longer landscape staples, which I think worked out better just because we tilled the ground up so it was a little bit looser. If we would have used the short 4-inch ones, it would have blown up. It was a very windy spring, if I remember correctly. And I did it in sections. So basically after work one day, I'd go out, roll some landscape fabric down, pin it down, cut it off, maybe get 2 rows done, and then have to call it a night. I had flowers that were hardening off at about the same time. So as I got rows of landscape fabric rolled out and prepped, I would put flowers in the ground. I had many helpers come out and help me. The kids came out, and yes, I let them use a tiny little handheld blowtorch with supervision. Nobody got hurt. They learned a little bit of a lesson on how to prepare it and how to use dangerous tools, but everybody was supervised and they did a great job helping. And we learned that burning holes with this tiny little, is it a butane torch, was not the way to go. And you need to size up and get one of the larger ones, as you can see in the video clip here. This went much faster. I did put, you can see little dots on the fabric. I had seen a tip from somewhere, whether it was Instagram or YouTube, where they just used a piece of chalk and made little dots on the fabric about where you needed your spacing. So I have rows that have spacing of 12 inches, 18 inches, 9 inches, and 6 inches. And they're pretty much just eyeballed, but thanks to the stripes on the landscape fabric, it made it pretty easy. I had planned out this cut flower garden so that the actual flower beds were 4 feet wide, and then I had 3-foot walking paths. There's also space on the ends of each of the rows for walking along the fence line and then towards the yard, I guess you could say. And now that it's been in place for 2 seasons, I can say it's worked pretty well. There are some flowers that grow big and bushy and take up the walkway, but overall this 4-foot bed, you can reach over from either side and pick your flowers, and a 3-foot walkway is plenty sufficient. I mentioned that this garden was put in a year ago, so I have a year of dealing with it under my belt, and the first year everything looked great. It was all nice and clean with a nice really dark black fabric. It cut down on the weeds a ton. I know that landscape fabric can be kind of a hot topic in the gardening world, and everybody can have their own opinion about that. For this space, I am glad that we put it down. It has helped a ton. I do have to do a little bit of pre-planning when I figure out my garden plan for the year. Different flowers have different spacing requirements, and because I burned holes in this fabric, there's only so many locations that the flowers would work. Last year I did leave the fabric in the ground. I did leave the fabric down over the winter, and it was fine. That might shorten the lifespan of it a little bit, but it wasn't worth the effort to clean it up, roll it up, label it, store it over winter, and then put it all out again 6 months later. That may change in the future, I'm not sure, but I think I'll go with that plan this year. My only question as I am getting ready for fall of 2023 now is I would love to put some compost down under this fabric this year. So I need to figure out a plan. Maybe I just unpin a bunch of it, let it flap in the wind, and lay some compost down. That way I get rid of my compost pile and put a little bit of nutrients into the soil at the same time. You can see that we were getting some of the flowers in the ground here. We started with ranunculus, which we had a whole row of, and the ones that were able to bloom were beautiful. We got them in the ground a little bit later than they would like, so they didn't all bloom profusely, but they were still beautiful flowers. We had snapdragons that went in the ground, and I believe we had a few larkspur plants that I had grown in milk jugs. Tilling the garden up really didn't take my dad that long. He did it over the course of 2 days, maybe a half hour each day, maybe not quite that long, and that went great. Laying the rows of fabric took a little bit longer, which is the hard part to estimate. When I'm working with Mom, it went pretty fast and we were able to get several rows down, but I remember there were a few days where we had some storms. It was pretty windy last year, so that also made things a little bit more difficult or just took a little bit more time. And then I would alternate and plant every other time I went outside. So it took a few days or a couple weeks to get everything situated and set up, but in the end I was thrilled that it was out there. It provided a little bit of color in the front yard, and it provided a lot of bouquets that went out to the community. So fun project to do. It's still in use the next year, so it was well worth it, and I can't wait for another season of it. And we will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.